So May the 9th, 1952, Phyllis, Carl, and I were married in St. Matthew's Anglican Church in the west end of Winnipeg. We had a big reception in the skating rink, or the curling rink, which was very handy, and set up in the upstairs of Mr. and Mrs. Carl's in a nice 3-room suite there, and began our married life. The summer was a good summer. We went traveling and with groups of friends, and however, living that close to your in-laws, the desire was always there to get out on our own. So in the fall of 52, I began to look in the newspapers for rentals or something to buy. However, buying was pretty well out of the question because neither Phyllis or I had much money at hand. And in the spring, the early spring of 53, I came across this cottage on the river for rent. Well, now that sounded like something that Phyllis and I could adapt to. So I got on the phone, arranged to meet the owner, and we went to St. Mattel, 48 River Road in St. Mattel, and went down this long driveway, and here was this little cottage sitting right on the banks of the Red River. It only had actually 3.5 rooms. There was a kitchen and a living room with a fireplace and a bedroom and a little sunroom, and no indoor toilet. There was, however, a bathtub and hot and cold running water, so we were sort of 50-50 in that respect. And so we signed the papers to rent this house, and said, by the way, would you consider selling it? And the owner said, well, I'll take it under consideration. I'll get back to you. So in the spring, we moved into 48 River Road and began our life as homeowners, albeit we were only renting. We made quick friends with all our neighbors. Dr. Penner was one of our neighbors. Mr. Blount, a retired school teacher, and his wife lived in the next lot. And then there was a vacant lot on the north of us, and several others. The lot itself was very challenging because nothing had been done to the place, and so, as usual, I began to make renovations to the house. And the first thing I did was build a back porch, roofed in, and a place that I could utilize as a shop and get things done. In the meantime, we also were looking for a vehicle, and I finally found one of the chaps at work had a 1929 Essex, which he was willing to sell for $75. And so Phyllis and I scraped up our change and bought this 29 Essex. Now, it was a real relic, but it ran quite well, and it had some peculiarities about it in that it didn't have a fuel pump, it had a vacuum pump, which would suck gasoline from the tank up and dump it into the carburetor, and then you would run. And on occasion, the vacuum tank would decide not to work, and so you'd be going along the street, and all of a sudden the motor would quit, and you had to hit for the curb, and then get out the hose and a little pail and siphon some gasoline into the pail, open up the front, and dump this gasoline into the vacuum tank, and lo and behold, the old car would go again. An interesting story on this was that we used this car to drive all over Winnipeg, and one time we had two people in the back and Phyllis and I in the front. We were driving along in the West End and decided to take the Arlington Street Bridge and go over to North Winnipeg. Well, so we were traveling along and on Arlington and hit the lights at the foot of the Arlington Street Bridge and charged up the hill, which was quite a steep incline, because this bridge didn't go over water, it went over all the railway tracks for the CPR. And we got halfway up, and we ran out of gas in the vacuum tank. And so, thank God for good brakes, we had to roll all the way back down onto Notre Dame and park this thing, and once again go and get the hose and siphon some gas out of the tank into a pail into the vacuum tank, and made a note to ourselves never again to try and go over the Arlington Street Bridge, because we just could not make it. And as a consequence, the only way we could get to the north end was go over under the Main Street subway, and we could get to the north end. Winter came along, and we found that our little cottage needed a lot of things. One thing was a secure heating system to it, because we damn near froze to death the first winter. So the next thing to do was I bought an oil floor heater, which you literally cut a hole in the floor, dropped this in, hooked up to a chimney, and you had a 200-gallon tank outside, and the oil would filter through from the tank into the heater in the floor, and boy, it was lovely. We were really enjoying the warmth. That particular winter was pretty cold, as I can recall. And one cold night, like minus 42 below, and the oil in our tank got too thick to run through the pipe to the heater. And there we were, no heat in the house. And we had to fire up the fireplace and damn near burnt the house down. And the next morning, I went out to the oil tank, which was sitting beside the house, and I knew what the trouble was. And so, how do you throw out an oil tank? Well, you either use a blowtorch or you set a little fire under it, which we did. I did. And finally, the oil started to run into the furnace in the house, and I put the fire out and didn't lose the house, and so we were all set to go again. All at this time, both Phyllis and I were working. I was working at the telephone system in the engineering department, and Phyllis was working for an airline, McDonnell's Aircraft. So we would take the car, the Essex, up to the corner of St. Mary's Road, and when the buses came by, and catch the buses, and Phyllis would go her way and I would go my way to downtown MTS building, which was right on the corner of Portage and Main. And during all of this, we acquired a dog, our first dog, and he loved it on River Road. He learned to live on the property and not leave it, and every night he would be sitting at our driveway at the road outside waiting for us to come home, and followed us into the yard, and life went on. It was a great thing. So I continued working at the telephone system and acquiring my skills as a engineer's aide. I learned how to operate a level and surveying equipment and drafting, and so I accumulated my skills, and then there came an ad looking for engineers' assistants for F.H. McGraw, a company who had set up in Winnipeg, who had the contract to develop what the old Winnipeg and Central Gas Company for natural gas. And I applied and got a job as a draftsman there. And so I parted with the telephone system and moved down the street to my new location with F.H. McGraw as a draftsman and a surveyor. And life began from there. F.H. McGraw was an American company with American engineers, and they were quite knowledgeable in gas conversion and things of that nature. So we fitted in pretty good, and Phyllis and I continued to accumulate a fund for purchasing, and within 3 years, the owner of the cottage that we were renting came to me and said, "Oh, I'm ready to sell." And I said, "All right, how much do you want?" And he said, "I want $5,000 for the place." I said, "Well, I've got $4,000. Will you take that in cash?" And he said, "Yes." And all of a sudden, Phyllis and I became owners of our own property, a full river lot, which was 1 acre of land, and all the systems just were moving great. So we had just made our first big purchase, and that was 48 River Road. And Phyllis and I settled down and started thinking of raising a family, and the potential of living on River Road was so great that it provided everything that I could possibly imagine, with the exception of space to raise a family. So the next thing we had to start doing was putting together some plans, designing a new house, and building it. In the interim, Chris came along, and that filled the little bungalow to its maximum, and so we had to get on the drawing board and start designing our new house. And in the interim, while I've been talking about various things in my life, when I moved from Starbuck to Winnipeg to take up a career, I found that not knowing anybody, that life was very, very lonesome. And a friend of mine, Doug Baldwin, also from Starbuck, had joined the Navy, and he was stationed in Chippewa in the interim, and we got together, and he said, well, why don't you join the Navy Reserve? So I looked into that, and I went down to HMCS Chippewa and made inquiries, and before I knew it, I was a member of the Royal Canadian Naval Reserve. Now, Chippewa was the end answer to a guy from the small town prairies. It was like a men's club. It provided everything. There was a massive parade square inside where we learned naval work. There was a large indoor pool where we could go swimming anytime we wanted. The Navy Seamen's had their own mess where we could go and dance on the weekends and have a beer. And it was just like a nightclub. I met many good friends there, and thoroughly enjoyed my free time life as a reservist. I became a radio operator, and I learned Morse code and learned about radios and so forth. And being in the reserve offered the opportunity to travel about Canada and the oceans for free, which is something in those days. Travel was very expensive and very hard to get at. So as I trained, there would be cruises posted out, and I spent 4 or 5 summers going to various places like the West Coast, and then a cruise on a minesweeper all the way down to Los Angeles and so forth, cruises to the Great Lakes, and all of these with buddies of mine from Chippewa. We participated. I was a member of the rowing crew from Chippewa, and I pulled second stroke. And we raced a sail or a lifeboat, and with five men in the team, and we were all pals together. One year we signed up to enter a regatta in Ottawa, and we trained for that. Amongst the things, there was a race, a war canoe race, so to speak, in which we loaded a cutter and paddled it with paddles. And of course, being from the prairies and being extensively different, we decided that if it was a war canoe race, that we should maybe look like Indians. And so we devised a uniform which consisted of a jockstrap and a towel, and that was it. So when the time came, and we all shipped down to Ottawa, and when the war canoe races were announced, we all dashed out of our holdings and dressed only in a jockstrap and a towel. And at that time there was a female mayor of Ottawa, Mayor Harriet, and apparently she was quite upset about seeing these 20 naked guys from the prairies running to get into their war canoe. However, we subsided, we existed, and we won the race. So that was good. And also another thing, in this particular trip, the five of us in our cutter races got kicked out of the top hotel in Ottawa because we were just ordinary seamen and only qualified officers were allowed in there. Well, we just about got tossed into jail for that because one of our buddies, Big Johnny Ledoyne, made quite a mess about we were Canadians too, just like officers, but we finally convinced John that it was okay, and we moved on. Another thing that, another cruise that we went on was on a fair mile based out of Hamilton. And a fair mile was like your torpedo patrol boats. They were fast and relatively small. And I was assigned. We had assigned bunks. And when I found my bunk, I found that I was in the top bunk and my face was no more than 2 inches from the deck above me. Well, at that time, I did suffer from claustrophobic. And the first night I crawled into that space, I found I couldn't even roll over because my shoulders would hit the deck. And I just had to just grab my blankets, and I went up, and I recall I slept all night out on the bridge, just huddled in a corner. So this fair mile was would cruise out of Hamilton and on the Great Lakes, and then come back, and generally spent the night. And so the second last day that we were in Hamilton, here once again, our group of the racing crew, including old John Ledoyne, were given an overnight leave. And so we took the bus from Hamilton to Niagara Falls. None of us had ever seen the falls before, so off we went. We had a great time in Niagara Falls, seeing the falls, visiting all the pubs. And as a matter of fact, we had such a good time that we missed the last bus back to Hamilton and ended up spending the night sleeping on park benches in the Niagara Falls Park. We were all in uniform, and fortunately I had my Burberry, which is a long coat, but for a pillow, all I had was my naval hat, which is a little brown, hard hat, which we wore with proud, and it was white. And in order to keep it white, we used to use white shoe polish. Well, needless to say, the night that we spent in the park in the Niagara Falls, I used my hat for a pillow, and when I woke up in the morning, the one side of my face was completely white because of all the mist that had fallen overnight had collected in that hat, and I had quite a time trying to convince people that I was sane on the bus back to Hamilton to regain our ship. I was talking about being in the Naval Reserve and my exploits on the Great Lakes and so forth. But one thing that really brought the reserve, being in the reserve close to home, was in 1950. When Winnipeg and all of Manitoba experienced extremely high water, and a state of emergency was called in the whole province. And so on Thursday nights was our parade night, so this particular Thursday night, I showed up at the naval base. And things looked a little different around there, but I walked through the door and was directed immediately to go out into the parade square, where it was announced that we were all in the active Navy now until further notice, and that we would not be going home, which was quite a surprise. And then, having said that, the commander then put us all into a line, and we started going through for a quick medical and inoculations. Not only was there one arm, but both arms. We walked in a line, and there were two guys with inoculations, and I would get inoculated in my right arm, and the next side was inoculated in my left arm, and from there we were sent outside and loaded into trucks and out to work on the dikes. Well, we're all used to the current size of needles, but back there in 1950, they had enormous needles, and so I started working on the dikes along with the rest of our group, and started off. I could carry a sandbag in each hand and put it on the dike, and then before long I could only lift one sandbag and put that on the dike, and then finally I couldn't use my arms at all because they were just so sore, and so the whole command were in the same boat as I was, and so they loaded us back up in the trucks, hauled us back to Chippewa, and we were assigned bunks, and my only time as a regular seaman began for the next 5 weeks while we worked on the dikes. I was assigned as a radio operator. I was assigned to a duck, and a duck was a vehicle that was designed to run both in water and on land, and it was like a landing craft. And there were 5 of us on board that, and we were assigned to evacuate people living south of Winnipeg along the Red River. And our first episode as this didn't turn out too well. We headed out St. Mary's Road and hit the water and kept on going, and then we found that we had as much water inside the boat as we had outside. And so the driver turned around and got back to high land and found we'd forgot to put the plug in the bottom. And so that was day 1. But after that, our episodes were very, very exciting. And we traveled and helped evacuate these people for several days from the south. And some of them, believe it or not, had never been out of their homes for years, and it was quite an experience. When everything was over, we had 3 days leave, and I remember my group. We ended up going to Grand Beach and enjoying some sand, although the weather was still cold and there was absolutely no swimming. But the mere fact that the Navy was there formed a great portion of my upbringing, and I learned discipline, but I also learned command. And what followed over the years was the occasional trip to the West Coast and picking up a ship in Esquimalt and going south, and a whole lot of other very interesting things, and it helped to build my character, and it was a great life.